Well, good morning. Welcome to another edition of Take 5. We are in John chapter 19, and we are in verse 28. We're looking at the crucifixion of Jesus. We're going to finish chapter 19 today. After this, Jesus, knowing that all was now finished, said to fulfill the scripture, "I thirst." A jar full of sour wine stood there, so they put a sponge full of the sour wine on a hyssop branch and held it to his mouth. When Jesus had received the sour wine, he said, "It is finished," and he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. When Jesus says it is finished, what is he talking about? Well, he means his work of dying for the sins of mankind is finished. He'd done it. He had accomplished everything God had wanted him to do. Now, we still got the resurrection coming. Alright, and that's like super important. That's what our entire faith is based on. But this was now out of Jesus' hands. He's saying, "It is finished. I'm done. I can go home." That was the whole idea there. Verse 31, since it was the day of preparation, and so that the bodies would not remain on the cross on the Sabbath, for that Sabbath was a high day. Okay, when you're talking about a high day, it means it was right before a feast. When it was just a very important Sabbath day. We just celebrated Thanksgiving, and you know, the days around Thanksgiving also are sort of considered holidays. That's the way they considered the Sabbath right before the Passover, sort of a holiday kind of situation. So the Jews asked, so they didn't want to do any work, see? So they didn't want to have to deal with a man still dying and then have to carry his body if it got into the next day and that kind of thing. They were very legalistic about doing work. So verse 31 again. The Jews asked Pilate that their legs might be broken and that they might be taken away. And this was a common practice. If they took too long to die, they would break the legs on the cross. Now think about it. This is a man hanging on a cross. And the way these guys died was from asphyxiation. They couldn't breathe because they'd be hanging, and then they'd try to push themselves up to breathe. And of course that would push the nails further into their bodies, and it would be extremely painful, but eventually they wouldn't be able to push themselves up anymore. They would lose strength and they would stop breathing. But this could take a long time. So the Jews asked Pilate to break these guys' legs. In other words, let's just go ahead and finish them off, was the idea there. So that way they can't push their way up to get the breath, so they'll die really fast now. So the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first. So he's still breathing. They break his legs. They kill him. They're brutal. And of the other who had been crucified with him. So they went to the other side. Verse 33. But they came to Jesus and saw that he was already dead. They did not break his legs. Now this was prophesied about him in the scriptures, that his bones wouldn't be broken. We're going to get to that in a second. Same reason also he said, "I thirst," back in verse 28. Jesus was the fulfillment of so many prophecies about him. But let's just keep going. But verse 34, but one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once there came out blood and water. And medically, if you see blood and water coming out of somebody's side, that means they're dead. That means their lungs are full of fluid. They can't live like that. Verse 35, he who saw it has borne witness. Alright? John, who's writing this, saying, "I witnessed this. I know he died," is what John is saying. You know, sometimes people wonder, can I trust the Bible? Can I trust what it says? Well, you've got an eyewitness account right here. His testimony is true, and he knows that he is telling the truth, that you also may believe. For these things took place that the scripture might be fulfilled. Not one of his bones will be broken. And again, another scripture says, they will look on him whom they have pierced. So Jesus is now dead. Verse 38, after these things, Joseph of Arimathea, who was a disciple of Jesus, but secretly for fear of the Jews, asked Pilate that he might take away the body of Jesus, and Pilate gave him permission, so he came and took away his body. Nicodemus also, who earlier had come to Jesus by night, came bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 75 pounds in weight. And Nicodemus was actually a Pharisee. So, he was not in agreement with what all these guys were doing, obviously. Verse 40, so they took the body of Jesus and bound it in linen cloths with the spices, as is the burial custom of the Jews. So they just embalmed, sort of an embalming kind of thing to keep it. This is what they did with bodies back then, so they wouldn't decay right away. Verse 41, now in the place where he was crucified there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb in which no one had yet been laid. So because of the Jewish day of preparation, since the tomb was close at hand, they laid Jesus there. And again, the Jewish day of preparation, talking about the Passover, they don't want to be working on that day, so they say, hey, look, here's our tomb. Let's get this thing done. Let's get him in there. Let's get the tomb sealed, and then we can celebrate the Passover. So that's what they were looking at, and that was their whole point and why they did everything they did. So now we've got Jesus in the tomb, and today is not a happy Bible study at all. But I will just say this: if you're going through some dark times in your life, and there was no darker moment in history than the crucifixion of my Lord. And this is Friday, but there's an old sermon title. It's Friday, but Sunday's coming. And I'm going to tell you, maybe you're going through a dark time. It's going to get better. This is the darkest moment in history, but it's about to flip and become the greatest moment in history. But we're not there yet, so you're going to have to come back for the next edition of Take 5.